Welcome to College Admissions Toolbox, giving you the edge you need to get into the colleges of your dreams, with your host, Steve Schwartz. That's me. Today, we're talking with Lian Dolan. Thanks so much for joining us, Lian. What was the pivotal moment that led your son to take that gap year?
He was injured his senior year. So the school he had gotten into and wanted to go to, they suggested he take an athletic deferment. And that year off, Steve, completely changed his educational goals. So it wasn't so much one pivotal moment as this idea that he had always assumed he would go to school to play soccer. And then when he wasn't playing soccer, he found that he had other areas of interest that he really wanted to pursue. So in April of that gap year, he came to me and he said, I don't think I want to go to college to play soccer. I think I want to go to this art school and study photography, which is what he had been doing for his gap year. He was at the point in his photography where he was getting paid for work and things like that. And that was an eye-opening experience. There is just a lot of growth that happens with 17, 18, 19-year-olds, and schools that may seem to be a perfect fit on September 1 of their senior year might not be by the time you get to the end of the year.
Sure. I mean, there's so much growth that happens even during that final year.
So much. And I don't ever see that in any college timelines. You know, you're supposed to have your essay written before your senior year and you're supposed to do this and do that and have your list of colleges. But the fact that actually you're like a changing, breathing, living entity, that's really not taken into account.
Yeah, sure. Those several months in between, a lot can happen.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. What do you see as being some of the differences between your two kids in the application process?
My first son, his focus was first on athletics, and secondly, he really wanted a school in a big city. Very quickly, he went to look at a couple of schools on recruiting trips in smaller towns, and he was not interested in that. My other son is not an athlete. He wants to be, God bless him, an English or creative writing major. So, you know, he's looking at small liberal arts schools in small towns. So it's really kind of an apples and orange application process. It's just very, very different. My older son, he was pretty easygoing about the whole thing, as he has always been his whole life about everything. My younger son, I think, feels the pain of the admissions process a little bit more. He's more hesitant. He's more nervous about it. He's worried he won't get in anywhere, even though I keep stating there are a million great schools. Don't worry, you're going to find a spot. But he has a lot more anxiety about the process than my older son did.
Sure. What are some of the steps that you're taking to try and deal with that anxiety?
You know, one is, I don't want to say lowering the bar, but sort of broadening his perspective. He wants to go to a small liberal arts school, and there are 10 or 12 that you've heard of that are great, that have tiny application acceptance percentages, but there are a million others that are fantastic. And so, that's what I'm just trying to reinforce with him, is that there are a lot of great teachers and smart kids everywhere. And particularly if you're interested in creative writing, or he's interested kind of in American studies, there are niche departments everywhere where you're going to find what you need. So don't focus so much on the brand name schools or the schools in somebody's list of top 10s. Let's just be open to a lot more schools. And then, trying not to freak out about stuff. Personally, me, not to bug him too much.
Definitely.
Not to actually say the word college every single day. Like, I mean, honestly, I think parents who are listening you have to shut up sometimes. Stop saying the word college, because they're actively engaged in their lives as juniors or their lives as first semester seniors. Their social issues are sometimes just as important to them as their college issues. So I try to hold back and not say college every day.
Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, I can remember my own college admissions experience. It's the sort of thing comes up at the breakfast table, then comes up on the way to school, then comes up, with your friends at school. Then when you're, on your way to SAT prep or whatever, it's like you need to have like a no college admissions discussion zone. Like, you don't talk about this in the car at this time of day or between these hours or something like that. Just so
believe me, it's hard, Steve. It's hard as a mother. It's killing me, but I'm really trying, because there's no sense in getting all worked up. There's a million things that could happen between now and next May when he's plunking down a deposit somewhere.
Oh, definitely. And you also gave a really important insight that, you don't want to just focus on the brand name of the school. You also want to look at the individual departments, because you're not going to Stanford University or Cornell University where, they have enormous grad programs and they might be strong, particularly, unique in one major, but not another. You're going to be studying within a department. You're most likely going to have a specific major. And that's that's where you're going to spend most of your time in the end.
Right. And you can find, it's so hard to get a gig as a college professor. If you are a PhD in history or something, you're going to take whatever job you can get. So when you go in and you look at the faculty profiles of some of these people, even if it's a school in the middle of nowhere that no one's ever heard of, there's amazing faculty there because that's what they wanted to do with their lives. And that's where they could get a job. So, that's one of the tactics I'm using with him.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I even at one point I remember I had a lot of career crises throughout college trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I looked into getting a PhD in history, and then I realized it was so competitive that I'm from New York, I love it here. I probably would have had to relocate to the middle of the country where I wouldn't have been as happy. So that's definitely something to consider. But some people will make that choice, and you'll find great folks out there. These grad school programs, these PhD programs are so competitive that you're going to find great professors everywhere.
Yeah, I was surprised a couple of years ago. I went back to my reunion at Pomona and in Claremont, California, and I was sitting at a table with classmates, just a random grouping, and at the table of 10, 8 of them were college professors, and which it seemed like an extraordinary ratio. But these were all people I knew in college were super smart, but they were teaching at anywhere they could get a job. Some of them were tenured professors at, schools like Holy Cross. One was a tenured professor at Brown, but others were teaching at much smaller institutions with not the big names because that's where they could get work. And I thought, wow, that kind of opened my eyes up to the sort of opportunities there are at lesser known institutions.
Definitely. There's a lot out there. Folks have to keep that in mind. Now, one thing we really love to hear on College Admissions Toolbox are stories. So could you take us to the moment in time of the worst college admissions moment you've experienced with either of your kids and tell us the story behind it?
Oh, the worst college admissions. Well, I have to say, when my son had really worked hard on his athletics, my older son, but wasn't a top recruit. So really had to go out and find a school for him and find something that fit. And he had to get in front of those coaches, which is a lot easier said than done. And he had to have, just the right game at the right time so someone would give him a shot. And he had lined all of that stuff up. And then he just had a giant injury in the spring of his senior year. And I had to call the admissions head. It was like 2 days before. And so even though he was a recruited athlete, you still have to work with the admissions department. And they said, oh, sure, he can take a deferment. Just let us know what he's going to be doing. They wanted to make sure it was a legitimate deferment and everything. And so we sent in all the information and it looked good. And we said no to all the other schools and we sent in our deposit. And then 2 days after the May deadline, the admissions office said, oh, you know what? We're not going to grant this deferment.
Oh my God.
And I was like, what? We've just said no to all these other schools and he's done all this stuff. And it was just a heart stopping moment. Now they reversed the decision, but, it was like one of those things where I was like, okay, get the legal team on it. Like I wasn't going to sue the school, but it just made me crazy. I was like, I'm going to lose my mind. I can't believe after all of this and all the time.
Oh, wow.
And that was probably the worst moment. Just, they didn't really understand why he was taking the deferment, and that was probably on us, but we had said no to every other school.
Yeah, really.
I thought my head was going to blow off. So that was the worst moment, but we worked through it very quickly. But it's just, I think a lot of people think their interaction with the school is going to be similar to their interactions with the admissions office. They ding a lot of schools because they've had a bad interaction with the admissions office, and that's probably not fair. And this guy did turn it right around when he finally understood what was happening. But it was a low moment for sure.
No, absolutely. I mean, my God, they could be so fickle for a second and not, put themselves in your shoes for a minute. Wow. What do you make of that?
Yeah. I think it was just, I actually think they had over accepted. I actually think they had a higher yield. Like my sister used to work at admissions. So I called her for like, wow, how could this have happened? And, she worked at Tulane and at Stanford for years. And, she said they probably had a higher yield. So they probably just didn't, or they didn't have the yield they wanted. So they were saying he could come here, but he has to start in September. They weren't saying he's not allowed in. He was saying he cannot defer. He has to come. And she said they probably got a lower yield than they expected on boys. So
right. So they want
him to show up in September. Yeah. So I was like, okay, all right, yeah.
Wow, it must have really been something to have a sister with former admissions experience to talk with as you're guiding your kids through the process.
It is actually really helpful because, she was the first person I ever heard say, for years, we talked about this on our podcast, and our radio show. She was the first person to say admissions people aren't looking for an all-around student. They're looking for an all-around class. And I had never heard that term, but about 10 years ago when we would start talking about this on the show for some reason, she said that, like, this idea of the all-around student is not really what we're looking for. We're looking for the oboe player, and we're looking for the editor of the newspaper, and we're looking for, the person who excels in community service, but we're not looking for the kid who plays the oboe, edits a newspaper, and does some community service. That's kind of a college admissions myth. And so she has always been a big advocate of just, working on what you're good at and selling that to the admissions people and putting together an application that highlights the one or two things you're really interested in, you're really good at. So I think that's great advice.
Absolutely. That is so, so true. They're not looking for the all-around person. They're looking for the all-around class. So, if you ask yourself, I'm a star guitar player, why'd my friend who's the oboe player get in? It's because maybe they already had a guitar person and this year they need an oboe person.
Right.
I hear this sort of thing from admission officers all the time, that those considerations really do play a big role. There is a certain element of luck involved at the end of the day.
Yes, there is. Yeah, there is. I mean, that's just the truth. That they're human beings reading the applications, and that's, sometimes you're in the right place at the right spot and sometimes you're not.
Definitely. In the admission process with your son who's currently in college, or the son that you have going through the process now, have either of them experienced, any particular moment of inspiration or insight along the way?
Definitely for my older son, that was he took a class his senior year in high school, and that really changed his focus. As I mentioned, kids change a lot that year. And I think one of the reasons is after doing this college prep academic gauntlet, they finally get to take some electives their senior year, finally get to take a few classes that aren't math and English and science. And so he took a media production class his senior year, and he had always been a very visual kid, doing things. He was a kid that was good at putting together PowerPoints and had excelled in art class and things like that. But it was really working with his classmates, doing that media production his whole year. All of a sudden, I could see that now he had found a path, like what he wanted to do. And it was something in media production. He loved the physical aspect of it. He loved the collaborative aspect of it. So he had an opportunity to go to a very good Division III school to play soccer. The coach was actively recruiting him. But when he found out there wasn't any single media production class or a photo class, he said, I can't go there because I could play soccer at a very good Division III school, but there's not a single class I want to take.
Oh, wow.
And that was, I thought, a level of maturity that I hadn't seen from him before. All of a sudden, he did have an academic focus. He was sort of vaguely thinking communications, or I don't know, he was up for anything. He wasn't thinking at all. Have you met 17-year-old boys? They don't really think that much. He was not focused on anything, but by the spring of his senior year, all of a sudden, he did have some definite ideas of what he thought his academic life might look like. And I think saying to that particular offer, you know what, that's just not a good fit for me, that was eye-opening. I was like, okay, now he knows what he wants to do, but it was really because of an elective he finally took his senior year.
Oh, wow. So that elective really changed everything.
It really did. Yeah, it really changed his life, in a great way.
Yeah, you never know where that inspiration will come from. It really seems like it's just, pure chance of, having that time to open yourself up to a new opportunity.
And I saw the same thing happen with a lot of kids in his peer group at high school. A couple, at his high school, they have a very advanced sports medicine and kinesiology program. It's a big sporty all boys school. But a couple of kids finally took the kinesiology class. They could finally take it senior year.
Right.
And that made a huge difference to them. They decided to pursue that in college. And there are only a few schools that offer kinesiology and sports medicine and physical therapy as a degree program. But I watched other kids do the same thing, like, oh, now I get it. Okay. I've been sort of muddling through math and science and not really knowing what I wanted to do, but they were, ignited by the idea of going into physical therapy or kinesiology or sports medicine. And that was exciting to see. So he wasn't the only one.
Totally. For a lot of kids, it's really the electives that are going to let them discover that passion. But I've got to say, it must have taken so much courage for your son to admit to himself and then take action because he had discovered this passion that, completely changed his course of action for the next year.
That's true, Steve. I will say that I admired him. That was a maturity I hadn't seen. And taking the gap year, even though it was really great, there were a lot of challenges that year. There's people have expectations that gap years are unusual here, in the United States, and they're commonplace in other places of the world. And people are suspicious of them. And when you're 17, 18, 19 years old, all people ask you about is college admissions. Where are you going to college? How is college? College. That's all they hear about. So when he was taking his gap year, I remember he came home. He ended up just working at home because he had to still play soccer. He thought he was pursuing that. He had to rehab. He was a valet parker at a high-end hotel here. He made a ton of money, by the way, running around parking fancy cars, but he would often run into, parents of friends, and they would look at him askance, like they thought he hadn't gotten into college, or they didn't believe him, or they thought like, oh, poor kid, he's parking cars.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
he was like holding down the line, like, no, I'm taking some photography classes at Art Center at night. I'm working on my portfolio. I'm going to apply to get in September. So it wasn't always like, oh, fantastic. He was not getting a lot of high fives from people. There were a lot of people concerned that he was not on the right track, when that was actually the opposite. He was on the track he wanted to be on.
No, sometimes having the strength and the courage to pursue what you really want, people aren't always going to understand that.
No.
That must be really difficult to face constantly. But, if you just focus on what you're passionate about and brings you happiness, it's all going to be fine in the end. Other people, they're probably spending a couple minutes when they see you thinking, oh, what's that guy up to? But then they go back to their ordinary lives, right?
Yes.
If they're obsessed with what you're up to, they probably don't have a lot going on themselves, I would imagine.
Right.
But absolutely. Even taking a gap year, I wish more people decided to do that. I think even just one more year of development and figuring out what you want to study might allow you to make better use of your time in college at the end. You know what I mean? Like, I definitely remember my freshman year of college, like I wasn't, making the most of it that I could have. In sophomore year, things definitely kicked up a level.
I'm laughing because is that a euphemism? Making the most of it, Steve? I definitely watched a lot of his friends go off to schools and then completely flail. That first semester, they were doing a lot of other things besides studying.
Yes, exactly.
College calculus seemed to have gotten the best of a lot of his friends. I can't say enough about the gap year, and I was not that enthusiastic about it, honestly. I wanted him out of the house. I'll be honest. He was making me crazy. And I really wanted to just get him to say yes to this school. You can redshirt, it's fine. And he was pretty adamant that he didn't want to. And his father apparently had been an 18-year-old boy and said, yeah, he could use another year. My son was young. He was only 17 when he graduated from high school. So that was that helped the decision. Like, he's not going to lose a ton of time. I think that's what parents are afraid of, is like they're going to miss out on something or they're going to lose something. Yeah. And I would say, having, experienced the gap year from the parental side, that's not the case. They grow exponentially. Brooks is now at Art Center College of Design here in Los Angeles, which is a top-notch program for photography and film, which is what he's doing. But it's a very competitive environment. It's brutal. The hours are very long. They try to weed people out. If you can't hack it, they want you to drop out. And there's no doubt in my mind that he would not have been prepared for the kind of academic experience he's having now if he had come straight out of high school. No way. I mean, most of the kids at Art Center have gone to 2 or 3 years someplace else and then transfer in. So he's already the youngest in his class. And I find it, it's interesting to me to see how much better he's handled the stress and the competitive nature and the hours of that school. He couldn't have done it at 18.
Sure. What would you say were some of the biggest differences you saw in him between June of senior year and then, about 15 months later or so when he actually started after the gap year?
He was he had a professional focus, which was surprising to me because my husband and I both went to small liberal arts schools where we were fine with people majoring in philosophy. We're fine with that. But he was very focused on, I would like to do photography and cinematography. Here are the areas of that I'm interested in. So that was just one huge difference. I mentioned he parked cars and he made a lot of money. And he spent all that money on a camera. And I know June of his senior year, he would have bought like an old Mini Cooper and he would have fixed it up. He's a huge car fan too, which again, that's what he wants to shoot is cars and automotive. And so, but by the spring of his gap year, he spent $9,000 of his own money on a really good camera setup, which is absolutely what he needed to take the next step in his work. And that was a real eye opener to me. He's not afraid of hard work. He's, say what you will, valet parking is a very physically demanding job. I mean, sure. He was running for, 11, 12-hour stints. And, he now is in a place where he was an athlete, so he always had good physical stamina, but he's standing in a dark room now for 10, 12-hour stints, and he's able to do that. So it's just, and the fifth thing is like when you're a freelancer, when you're in a creative business, you have to gin up your own work. It's not like going into a normal career. And I know that as someone who's been a freelance writer for 20 years, you have to pitch ideas. You have to talk to strangers. You have to create your own work. And I think that year off, he was always good talking to adults, but then, he was surrounded by adults. He was interacting with people at the hotel, with celebrities, with, guests and things like that. And he really grew in terms of his confidence, in terms of presentation as well. And that's, I thought, so when he said to me, I'd like to go to art school, I was like, I think you could actually make a living because you're actually pretty comfortable talking to people about your own work and setting your prices and things like that, which is you have to have it as a freelancer. You could be as talented as you want to be, but if you can't get your own work, it's not going to work out for you. Sure.
I mean, you've got to be willing to hustle.
Yeah. But that's, I was just actually, I just interviewed the woman who's the president of Pitzer College, Laura Scandera Trombley, and I wrote a cover story for a magazine about her. She's changing jobs and moving to the Huntington Library here, but her son just took a gap year. And he's starting off in the fall at another school. And we were talking about like just the tremendous growth that they do. Her son did a more experiential program gap year. Like he went to sea at school or school at sea or whatever those things are called. He was on a boat for months and stuff like that. Yeah. My son was just parking cars, but, it was interesting to hear a college president say, I feel like he's in just much better shape to start his college career now, because he's had this year experience where he's had to figure out a lot of things on his own that weren't academic, that it was just life stuff.
Absolutely. And then you know what? Some kids become, much more mature after that gap year, and some kids even finish college in 3 years. Yeah. So you might still finish the 4 years later as you were initially expected to do. And
you don't lose any time.
And even if you graduate a year later, so
whatever. I know.
You're going to live to, everyone who's a teenager today is going to live to be 120 probably. So it's not that big a percentage.
Yeah, no, I agree. But it takes a while. everything's geared toward them graduating from high school and leaving the next month. All your friends are doing that, and all their friends are doing it. Everything's geared towards that timeline. So to slow that timeline down, or to differentiate from that timeline, it does take a little bit of a leap of faith.
Absolutely. Since it's not so common, I'm just curious, were there any communities, in person or online, that you found that were devoted to helping gap year parents and gap year students kind of not feel so alone?
I am laughing, Steve, because I didn't find anyone online, but I had two friends whose sons also took gap years for various reasons.
Right.
And we founded our own support group for each other because
that's great. That's great.
We would meet up and walk. I live in Pasadena, California. We walk around the Rose Bowl, and in our 3 miles, we would just let it all loose. Like, they're driving us crazy. Is this going to work? Are they ever going to go to college? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, I could not have done it without them, because, it's weird to have them living at home. And it's a different, for us, it was a different, it's just a different rhythm. You don't expect it, and you're worried that the further away they get from school, they're not going to want to go back. But that is not the case. Believe me, the real world is terrible. They want to go back to school, and working full time is awful. And so he was happy to get back to school, but yeah, we did found our own support group.
Oh, that's great.
And it was, and you know what? Honestly, the boys had each other. They were friends in high school, so they had some company. Because that's the other tricky thing. I mean, that they, all their friends leave, and they're home alone if they decide to stay or do something that's not, a prepackaged program. So they needed each other, and so they hung out a lot. So that was also good.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears now, Lian, and move into the lightning round. We're going to ask you some rapid fire questions.
All right.
You give me some rapid fire responses. Are you ready?
I think I'm ready. Okay, Steve.
Great. What's your number one piece of advice for the college admissions process?
Respect who your children are.
Definitely.
Just you really understand who they are and what school would be the right fit for them. And don't try to wedge them into a school that's the right fit for you, or the right fit for your neighbors, or the right fit for your high school graduation announcement. Just respect who they are.
Sure. You don't want to force it on anyone.
Right.
Could you share with us one habit that you believe contributes to college admissions success?
Slow and steady, just kind of keeping on top of things. I was surprised, even the Common Application, it sounds like a benign thing, something everyone can figure out, but it's more complicated than it is. And every college has a different system of submitting and essays and timelines and stuff. So just really trying to get a jump on stuff and not waiting till the last minute to submit the applications and to get the transcripts and to get the teacher recommendations.
Definitely. Planning ahead is so important.
Yeah.
What's one online college admissions resource that you absolutely love?
I didn't have one. I found that all of the college websites were generally fantastic. And if you actually go in there and muck around and look around, you can find blogs, and you can find Tumblr accounts, and you can find social media accounts for most of the colleges you're looking at. And to me, that gave me a real insight into the character of the colleges. So, because when you go on those broader sites like College Confidential, you're not really sure who's talking.
Sure.
Or anything. But I liked going in deeper on the college sites themselves and using their social media to kind of figure out what their values were.
Yeah, their personality really comes through there. There's so much available to look at online.
It really does. Yeah, Definitely. It really does.
What's one book that no college applicant should be without?
Oh, well, I think the FISC guide is a really good basic guide. It has a million colleges in there. I think it's easy to read for both parents and students, and you feel like you get a little bit of the student insight and the parent insight. But for my younger son, we're really using Colleges That Change Lives, that book.
Ooh, that's a great one.
Right. So that's, it's about 40 kind of lesser known small liberal arts schools that all have something unique to offer. And those schools are generally a good fit for him.
Yep, and we'll definitely link to that one in the show notes. It's so valuable. More people need to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
What are you working on these days?
I'm working on a novel. So, I write women's fiction in addition to a bunch of other stuff. So I have my third novel coming out, a year from now. So I have a book of essays coming out in October and then a third novel coming out next spring. So I'm just, finishing up that. And it's about art history. It's an art history mystery. And I don't really know much about art history, Steve. So I'm going back. Good. Putting on my college student mode, doing a lot of research, working things out. So
that's great.
Everything I learned in college, I'm still learning. I'm still
back
using
to research.
Back
to research mode. And tell us a little bit more. Some of our listeners, just love podcasts. Could you tell us a little more about your podcast and your talk show?
Sure. Satellite Sisters is a show that I created with my 4 real life sisters. At the beginning, we started doing the show in 2000. So we've been on the air for 15 years. We started on public radio, then moved to ABC, and now can be found online at iTunes or Stitchers or satellitesisters.com. And we kind of cover the world through our own eyes. So we do news headlines. We talk about stories that affect us. We talk about our lives. We talk about trends. We talk about entertainment. But we all, even though we have the same parents, we bring a pretty different perspective to the show. So there's a lot of laughs and there's humor and there's some pathos occasionally. It's the kind of show, it's an hour of, the kind of conversation you would have with your friends if you were sitting around at a table drinking coffee. That's kind of what we aim for. So my sisters are single, some are married. I'm the youngest sister now. But we've been doing the show for 15 years. So a lot of my listeners have really grown up, with my boys, and they feel very invested in their futures. So that makes me laugh.
That's great.
That makes me laugh.
That's great. Thanks so much for joining us, Lian. Any final words before you go? Words of wisdom?
Oh, it's a long year. So don't get too crazy, and there's a spot for everyone. You've heard it before, but it's really true. There's a spot for everyone.
Great. So true. And where can folks find you online?
The easiest place to find me is satellitesisters.com. If you go to satellitesisters.com, that's the easiest spot. And then there are links to my own personal websites and things like that there. But that's the best place for me.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us, Lian.
Thanks, Steve.
Take care. I started listening to podcasts and audiobooks because I felt like I didn't have enough time to sit down and read everything on my list. Since then, I've managed to quote-unquote read dozens of books just by listening to them while I'm doing other stuff. One audiobook I absolutely love is The Gatekeepers. It's by a reporter who followed an admission officer at Wesleyan for almost a full year. In The Gatekeepers, he shares everything he learned on the inside. Just go to collegeadmissionstoolbox.com/audiobook and you'll be able to choose any free audiobook you'd like. Thanks for listening to College Admissions Toolbox. Head over to www.collegeadmissionstoolbox.com to get more free tools and resources that will help you get into the colleges of your dreams.